So before our reading, we talked a little bit about it, but what is a myth? What makes a story a myth? Right.
It makes the myth that the belief of people like the Roman Greek believe in many gods.
Good. So it's going to, the myths surround like a group of people's beliefs. So she mentioned the Romans and the Greeks, they believed in many gods, right? So those myths are going to be surrounded about and stories about the many gods they believe in. What else makes a story a myth? Yeah.
A myth is like, it could be like fake.
Yep. So it's going to be more that we consider them nowadays made up, right? So especially these myths about these gods and goddesses, nowadays they're considered fiction. But at one point in time, people told these stories as to go hand in hand with their religion, to go hand in hand with what they believe. Science is what starts to make these myths not true anymore, right? So we know now that a lot of these things they were believing in, like Saturn. Saturn was the god they believed of harvest and crops, right? They prayed to him and they worshiped him because they believed if they did that, they'd have what?
Good crops.
They'd have good crops. They thought that when Saturn was super, super mad, their crops would what? Die and be bad. But when Saturn was super, super happy, they had great crops, right? So they have this belief and these stories going around it with their myths. So another good thing to take is, I feel like it kind of just naturally happens, but those myths, they're from ancient cultures. They're not anytime recent, right? Those myths are told ancient cultures. I apologize. So are myths fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Fiction. How is a myth different from a legend? Turn and talk with your neighbor. How is a myth different from a legend? Three, two, one. I heard some good pieces to it, but a huge takeaway from that myth and legend is myths are completely fictional. Whereas in those legends, they're going to have some factual pieces to it, where at least the people or some of the events in history are going to be real. But we know that in a legend, it's exaggerated, and we can't prove everything, right? What did some inhabitants of Rome and inhabitants of other places, what that had polytheistic beliefs, do you do to please the gods they believed in? So what did they do in order to please those gods? We learned about some examples with Saturn, but people who have those polytheistic beliefs, what did they do in order to please those gods? Haley. They gave offerings. That was a great one. They mentioned that you would walk into these temples and there would just be this table, right? And it's where you place your offerings. It was to the gods. Good. Joey. They worshipped them. They would, they worshipped the gods. Emery.
They gave things to them?
Yep, that would be those offerings, right? They gave things to the gods and they would leave them at their temples for them. Yep.
They would
You can describe it for us.
It's been like they sacrifice.
Very good. They would sacrifice things, right? They said if they were having a bad time or a bad year at the crops, they might sacrifice a lamb, which means they're giving the life of the lamb in order to improve something else. Okay. They would deliver foods to the gods. They would celebrate them. They would have, remember each year we learned about Saturn, right? They did a big festival. Go wash your hands, Cooper. They did a big festival every year in celebration of that god, hoping like, hey, I'm celebrating you. This is awesome. We're celebrating you. Then the god's going to be happy with them, right? Why were there many farmers in ancient Rome? Why were there so many farmers in ancient Rome? Griffin.
Because there's a lot of people.
There were a lot of people. Good. Are they going to hold jobs like we have nowadays? No. So why would farming be so important then? We know there's a lot of people. Charlie.
Because they don't have like stores to go buy food.
Yeah, exactly. There's not going to be stores to buy food. It's going to be part of their culture that's embedded in there, right? It's important to their way of life. It gave them food. It gave them something in order to trade for something else. Maybe I grow all the wheat or all the grain, and Chloe raises all the sheep. Well, when winter comes and I need wool, and winter comes and she needs food, what can her and I do?
Right.
We're going to be trading things as well. So it's very important to their way of life. Why did the ancient Roman farmers want to please Saturn, the god of harvest? Turn and talk with your neighbor. Why would they want to please Saturn, that god of harvest?
Yeah, so the crops don't die, and if you mad all the time, they won't get to eat and won't die.
Three, two, one. I want to remind you that in our reading, we heard about Greeks and Romans, right? And how Greeks and Romans had a lot of the same beliefs, and they had different names for a lot of those gods. But because of the closeness of where they lived and that they were interacting with each other on the islands, on each other's coastlines, they were often learning about each other's gods and what they did to worship and what they did to praise these different gods. So a lot of the history between the two are going to be interconnected. Did Greeks have the same names for their gods? No, but they pretty much had the same basic idea. One for the sun, one for the ocean or the water, one for our earth, for our land. So they had a lot of different gods that they were praying to or praising, worshiping. With that too, did they have the same language? No, they didn't have the same language, which is going to be part of the reason those gods had different names, right? Zeus and Jupiter, different names, and that's okay. It's just kind of showing us that even within those different countries, their beliefs were very similar, but they had some differences as well within them. Sounds good? Ready to move on with it? We are going to move to our next piece of today.